About 2 years after the Season 1 finale aired, The Last of Us Season 2 is here. I decided not to cover the first season on my channel because I had never played the insanely popular game it was based on that came out in 2013, and I didn't know much other than people had strong feelings about it. While I enjoyed the first season of the show, it definitely felt like I was missing out by not playing the game first, so I went and did that after the fact and went ahead and played through the second one when it came out on PC about a week ago. Somehow I managed to do that almost entirely spoiler-free. I knew the first one was almost universally loved, and the second one was divisive. But since I never had a reason to go looking, most of the big surprises played out like they were supposed to. I feel like this was probably the right decision, especially the spoiler-free part, without really looking at the discourse surrounding the second game's release. If you're thinking about whether you should try to play the game, I'll touch on this a little more towards the end. But the big thing the show pulled off all on its own was getting you invested in Joel and Ellie by the end of its first 9 episodes. And that made Joel's fateful decision at the end matter. Second season is poised to explore the emotional aftermath of that decision. It even starts off by replaying the final scene, which honestly doesn't seem necessary, since that did a pretty good job of lingering in the back of the mind for the past 2 years. Revisiting Ellie's hesitant okay in response to Joel's lie about the Fireflies does emphasize that she probably doesn't believe him though, not really, but also that she sort of needs to let that slide if she wants to move on to the next phase of trying to settle down to live a normal life in Jackson, at least as normal as life can be after cordyceps. Remember, this is all taking place decades after the initial outbreak we saw in the first couple episodes of the show. That happened in 2003 and spread quickly, turning the infected into aggressive zombie-like creatures within hours. The main outbreak in the show happens after a mutated strain of cordyceps, which is a parasitic fungus, infects people who eat contaminated food made with tainted flour or grain. The initial case happened in Jakarta, Indonesia, one of the world's leading exporters of those products. The show provided an earlier flashback of a TV interview with 2 scientists discussing how cordyceps infected insects, and how it floods them with hallucinogens and essentially turns them into puppets. In that way, the fungus is different than viruses because it aims to control its hosts rather than kill them. At the time of that interview, cordyceps couldn't infect humans, but the scientists theorized that if global warming would raise the world's average temperature high enough, that would change. And obviously that happened in the show's timeline. This scene also encapsulates the complicated moral implications of allowing yourself to love in this world where survival isn't a passive affair or something that can be taken for granted, and how sticking your neck out for that won't be something you can do without consequences, regardless if the decisions are impossible and the loss you'd experience otherwise is unfathomable. It leaves you wondering what you would do if you were in Joel's situation. And after spending so much time with these two, the answer is usually you'd probably do the same thing. For me, it wasn't so much about whether he made the right decision. If you take everything else away and look at it objectively, then yeah, it's probably more correct to do what's best for the greater good. But that's not how things really work when you're facing a choice like this in real life. So while the final scene is the one that sticks with you, the conversation they have right before they get caught by the Fireflies and are ultimately separated is the one that sets the stage for what's to come in season 2. In that, we learn about Ellie's survivor's guilt and her desperate need for a way to make things make sense. Haunted by all the death along the way to get there, Ellie needs her immunity to matter. She reveals that this survivor's guilt started with her friend Riley, which we saw play out in episode 7 of the first season. After the magical night they shared in the abandoned mall, which was supposed to be a night to remember before saying goodbye, ends with them both getting bit. If it weren't for her immunity, they would have died together, and having to end her friend's life is something that's haunted Ellie. Riley is also another person who left her. Remember, she was raised in a Fedra orphanage/training school, so there's a fear that Joel will eventually leave her as well. Regardless, the need for her life to mean something makes her willing to sacrifice herself for a cure, which Joel is obviously at odds with. While he tells her that he struggled for a long time with surviving after he lost his daughter, his advice is that no matter what, you keep finding something to fight for. This is something he talked to Tommy about earlier in the season, and there he makes it explicit explicit that he almost gave up before Ellie gave him a reason to live. Here he's telling Ellie she's his reason to go on, while she's telling him her suffering can't be for nothing. It's a desperation for meaning butting up against a desperate need to keep her alive that leads to the massacre at the hospital and the need for Joel to lie about it. It underlines the core question: does the love you feel for someone outweigh something that might end suffering on a much larger scale? It sure feels like that sometimes. And does keeping her alive really make it all meaningless? Is sacrifice necessary? As a child, is her brain fully functioned enough to understand the kind of decisions she's making? And as functioning essentially as her adoptive parent, does Joel have a responsibility to make sure she makes the right decision? These questions don't have easy answers, which sets the stage for everything that happens in the season 2 premiere. After the opening replay of the finale's final exchange, the camera fades in from white to a shot of a giraffe. These are the same giraffes that appeared in the finale just after they reached Salt Lake City, but before they reached St. Mary's Hospital. This is a key scene in the story and last season because Ellie starts out the episode still reeling from her dread-drenched encounter with David, the creepy preacher who tried to make her his child bride so that they could rule his Christian cult group that had recently started dabbling in cannibalism. For a brief, peaceful pause, she gets to be a kid again and just be in the moment. It's a bit of joy and hope that everything in this world isn't as grim as what they've experienced on their trip across the country. The mood is entirely different when they pop back up in the season 2 premiere. We see a group of new characters standing in front of some freshly dug graves. Because we know how Joel massacred the Fireflies in the hospital nearby, it quickly becomes apparent that these are some of the survivors burying their dead. We see the character, who we'll learn is Abby, looking at the giraffes, and we see that hope is missing from her eyes. When the question of why Joel did what he did comes up, Abby starts to talk about the rumor she heard about a kid, but another member of the group cuts her off before she can say a kid that was immune, claiming that it couldn't be true because it isn't possible. By the way that they're cutting each other off, you get the sense the show is holding something back. One of the other members says something to the effect that it doesn't matter anymore anyways, but we never really find out what she means, and they move on to what they'll do next before they can get into it any further. The core members of the Fireflies are buried right in front of them, but the character who we'll learn is Owen says there's an outfit in Seattle that's run by a guy named Isaac that would take them all in. Abby is adamant that they find Joel first and doesn't seem flexible when she first brings it up. Owen points out that they don't have much to go on. There's even some confusion if his name is Joel or Joe, but the big thing is that he drove away in their only functioning vehicle, so there's really no chance to catch up with him now that he has a 3-day head start. Abby is clearly pissed and wants vengeance, and Owen seems to know her well enough to recognize this while still being able to placate her. He says the group in Seattle might have resources, and that sounds like the smart move, but he also agrees to help her find Joel when an opportunity presents itself. He goes on to clarify that that means that they'll help her kill him, and the others agree, and when she goes to put a Firefly medallion on one of the grave markers, she clarifies that when they do that, they'll kill him slowly. And okay, she sounds like a really pleasant new character for us all to get invested in. After that, we get the credit sequence, which looks the same as it did in season 1 as far as I could tell. The color of the show's title in the background at the end is white instead of red, but otherwise they didn't change it for the new season. Then we jump ahead to find Ellie training in Jackson. She's getting beaten by a much larger member of the community there, but she's able to use some grappling skills to turn things around and force him to submit. She's pretty excited about it until she finds out that he pulled the punch that gave her a bloody nose. You can see that she doesn't like it when she finds out that the guy running the training session, who we'll find out is named Jesse, had her opponent hold back because he wouldn't want to explain to Joel that Ellie got knocked out. This is the first hint that some tension is built up between them in the 5 years since he lied to her about what happened with the Fireflies. When we see her using some straggler infected for target practice later with Tommy, it's another chance to see that she's been improving her skills in the gap between seasons. She looks a lot more competent with a rifle here than she did the last time we saw her shooting with Joel in season 1. But also this is another situation where he's trying to use his influence to keep her her safe, which to her feels overbearing. They get ready to go back because Tommy wants to send out a patrol to take care of the infected before they get too close to town, and when Ellie volunteers for it, he tries to reassign her to Gatewatch. When she pushes back, it's a chance for the show to tell us that they've kept her immunity a secret from everyone in the community. Since they're alone, she shouts about being immune, and this eventually gets them to the point where he caves on letting her go on the patrol. By telling her she needs to follow the rules, he's telling us that she has a rebellious streak that's hard to deal with sometimes. If you've never played the games and wondered what they're like, there's a long sequence in the middle of this episode that feels like it's pulled right out of one of them. It starts at the Miller residence, and more specifically in the garage since Ellie has moved in there. She's cleaning her gun, getting ready to go on patrol, and she's sitting at a workbench that looks exactly like the ones you encounter periodically while playing. We'll also see that she's upgrading her gear when Dina helps her strap on her new long gun holster when she arrives to pick her up for the patrol. When you look at Ellie's arm, you can see that she has a large tattoo on her right forearm, where her bite mark used to be. But the skin underneath it looks like it was burnt first. This is something that happened off screen, but I noticed that the show is doing something similar to what the game did, in that in some of the flashbacks you see in the trailers for season 2, you see her wearing a bandage after she got the burn, and then one later when she's wearing short sleeves where you can see it before she got the tattoo. This is something that will come back up, so for now it's just an interesting detail to tuck away in the back of your mind. Right before they leave, you can see a little bit of sexual tension on Ellie's end when Dina gets close. And there's another reminder that she doesn't want to be around Joel when Dina asks if she wants to join them to watch a movie. On her way out the door, we see her pick up the knife that her mother gave to Marlene to pass on to her. And when she arrives at the stable, we see that she's riding Shimmer, who was only a foal when Ellie met her when they first arrived in Jackson last season. Jesse briefs their group before they head out and has to ask Dina and Ellie to stop joking around and take things a little more seriously because the others look up to them. We get some info on the relationship dynamics. Ellie used to hook up with the patrol leader, whom Dina calls the other one, as in the other lesbian in town. Dina susses out that Ellie is into someone else, and since she just broke up with Jesse, she says they should go together to the New Year's party, and she confirms that it's about to be 2029 in the show's timeline, which checks out if you do the math. Before they can get too deep into things, they come across a large pool of blood that leads them to a gruesome scene where a group of clickers got into a death match with a grizzly bear. They get pumped up when they notice one of the infected made it back inside the market. They ignore Kat's suggestion of following the rules and going back to report it. And then they climb up the truck, which is another one of those things you find yourself doing over and over again in the games. As they take out the clickers, a couple of things stand out. There's a reason they're somewhat cavalier. They're competent, they enjoy the challenge of killing the infected, and they make a good team. And I mentioned climbing up over the truck, so I might as well keep going on the gameplay comparisons. There's quite a few familiar things going on here. The stealth kills, throwing the bottle as a distraction. The bulletin board looks like you should check it to see if there's a note hanging on there. Definitely check those Employee of the Month photos for potential clues, and oh yeah, you're definitely going to fall through rotted out floors from time to time. After Ellie does that, there's a great scene that probably works just as well whether you know what a stalker is or not. In this case, the infected she encounters doesn't just charge directly at her so she can shoot it. She even gets pissed about this, and that makes for a really tense encounter with one of the coolest looking infected we've seen. When she's looking at the Real People magazine cover from September 22nd, 2003, which is the day before the outbreak in Jakarta, Joel's birthday is the 26th. It's perfect how you see the stalker scurrying away in the background, and there's a pretty legit jump scare before she gets bit again. She eventually is able to shoot it, and then has to play things down when Dina finally gets there, because of course she can't tell her she got bit. In a short scene that follows, we see the entire Jackson Council, where they're told about this stalker who almost seems smart. As Ellie says, it wasn't like doing math smart, but it did what people do. It took cover, planned, waited, and lured her in, aka stalking, thus the name. Dina lies about being with her as things went down, which Maria picks up on. And Tommy tries to get on them about being reckless, but Ellie's able to turn it back around on him, pointing out that if it were him and Joel, they'd have done the same thing. The council sends them out, and there's some concern about all the sightings lately, but Tommy points out that 6 infected isn't exactly a horde, at least not yet. Otherwise, Jackson appears to be booming. We see groups of new refugees coming into town and find out that Maria is urging Joel to finish the construction projects that are in full swing faster to accommodate the influx. After joking about a big dial on his constructometer that he just has to turn up, he argues that they might be letting too many people in, saying they need to look after their own first or they'll be no good for anyone. While he plays with Tommy and Maria's kid Benji and talks to him about shooting the monsters outside the fence, Maria reminds him that he was a refugee too. And this idea of monsters makes you think about the things Joel did with Tommy after Sarah's death. On one of the construction projects, an issue comes up when the crew realizes that their water mains are filled with roots. Joel is the foreman on the job, but he's inside tinkering around with some circuit breakers, so Dina has to come to ask him for help. As they're talking shop, she asks why Ellie is mad at him. Even though we see that they're close, Ellie hasn't explained the tension. Joel says it's probably just normal. She's 19, he's essentially her dad, no one likes their parents at that age, and this all makes sense. Then he asks what he did, which of course we know, just as he does, but Dina's not knowing reinforces the fact that no one in the story does. However, everyone can see that something is going on. When he says he can't hold himself responsible for another person's emotional state, that's enough for Dina to ask the question we're probably all thinking, because this doesn't sound very Joel. Is he in therapy? Which we'll find out that he is. When he goes to his appointment later, his therapist comes out with whiskey, which doesn't turn out to be a normal occurrence. But his paying her with weed is, which is kind of funny since she complains about the quality. The drinks are because it's her birthday, and when he realizes she's been at it for a while already, she initially says it's because she woke up sad. It's the first birthday she's spent without her husband in 41 years. And after she accuses Joel of leaving something out about why Ellie's upset with him, she comes clean that she's not sad, she's angry that he shot and killed her husband. The details on this are a little unclear. She says she knows why he had to do it, which makes it seem like he got bit or otherwise infected. But she never explains why she's mad exactly if that's the case. She just says something about how he did it, and it's a little more confusing because there was a character in the game named Eugene and Jackson who also grew weed, but he was one of the rare characters in this world who actually died of old age. I'm not sure if this is a situation where there's something else that'll come to light later, or if it was just a way to get him where he needed to go, because what's important here is that he can't tell the truth. Only a handful of people know about Ellie's immunity and what happened at St. Mary's, and there are very important reasons to keep it that way. As abrasive as Gail comes off under these circumstances, she does give Joel the chance to get it off his chest because she doesn't know he can't, and he has no choice but to default to saying he saved her as a tear rolls down his cheek before he walks out. So we see that this necessary lie that was supposed to make things easier for both of them, really. He wasn't just lying to protect Ellie. It protects him too, because he'd be admitting that he took away her choice if he told her the truth. The lie isn't really working as intended. By shutting him out, Ellie is effectively isolating him. After we watch her use her knife to cut herself to cover up her new bite mark, she memorializes Dina's dumb barbecue joke from earlier in her journal. We know this is her type of thing, and apparently Dina does too. She writes "don't fuck it up" underneath to get rid of any uncertainty about whether or not she's into her, and then Joel knocks on her door to see if she's going to the New Year's Eve party. She's evasive, and when he asks if she's been playing her guitar, he notices that the strings are shot, and that works to give him something he can fix, so he grabs it and makes his exit. She does go to the dance, where she looks a little out of place. Her standing on the sidelines by herself is contrasted by Dina, who is the center of attention on the dance floor. Jesse comes up to talk about that, and when she says they'll be back together in 2 weeks, he says it's not going to happen. Before he can say why, they're interrupted by Dina, who slams his drink and pulls Ellie out onto the dance floor right as a slow song starts playing. It's obvious this is where she wants to be, but you can't really tell if Dina is on board in the beginning. They were introduced as best friends. Ellie certainly isn't ready to believe it's something more, even after she pulls her close, so she points out how every guy in the room is staring at Dina right now. This turns out to be the opening she was waiting for, suggesting that maybe they're all jealous of Ellie, who then says she can't be considered a threat. If Dina hadn't already established herself as the one who has the moves out of these two, she locks eyes and says she thinks they should all be terrified of Ellie before swooping in for a kiss. The romance here is real, and this is also one of those giraffe scene moments where all the shit outside the fence feels a million miles away. Right up until a new character named Seth gets pissed and comes over implying that their gayness is inappropriate for the family event. Dina eggs him on a little before deciding to leave, but when he calls them dykes on their way out, Ellie isn't about to let that slide, right up until Joel pops into the frame to shove Seth to the ground and tell him to leave. It's a situation where his parental instinct kicks in, and even though it's ridiculous, you can't really blame him for that. On top of everything else that's been happening, Ellie does, and you can't really blame her for that. And she doesn't pull her punch when she asks what's wrong with him and says she doesn't need his fucking help in front of everyone. It's a lot, and he doesn't take it well, and it really highlights how much the stakes have changed since they were out on the road. Jackson is a place where you can form relationships and plan for the future. And you have to imagine it's difficult for that to feel real for them after what they've experienced. For now, she's pissed. And when she walks past him playing the guitar on the porch, she doesn't say anything. And the way the camera lingers on his reaction makes the next scene feel even more ominous. As a group of people from the party make their way home, one of them drops a sparkler on the ground. And as the camera pushes in on that, we see the broken water mains that were filled with roots from earlier, and notice some of the cordyceps mycelium pushing through there. Remember that the show changed some things about how the fungus works compared to the games. Rather than spreading through spores, which could have been hard to depict on the show and would have required them to spend a lot of time putting on and taking off masks, they introduced what is essentially a mushroom network. To dumb this all down, mycelium are tendrils that function in a similar way as roots do, and work as a network to share nutrients and communicate through chemical signals. Tess explains how this works in episode 2 of the show, saying that the fungus also grows underground in long fibers like wires, some of which stretch for over a mile, so that if you step on a patch of cordyceps in one place, you can wake a dozen infected somewhere else. We've seen how mycelium transfers from one body to another in that same episode later after Tess is bit and getting ready to sacrifice herself to buy Joel and Ellie time. We saw them in this episode around Ellie's bite mark from the stalker in the market, and all of that's to say this doesn't bode well for Jackson. The monster network is making its way in, and since he was talking about how circuit breakers work earlier, you start to realize they don't have a mechanism to shut this network down. If that wasn't bad enough, that's only the first problem, because as this show likes to point out, a lot of times it isn't the cordyceps you have to worry about, it's the people. On that note, the episode ends with Abby and her group showing up in the woods outside of Jackson. So this is a pretty solid start. There is quite a bit of table setting, which is to be expected. They're in a new place. There's a 5-year time jump. There's no shortage of tension and emotional turmoil between Joel and Ellie, which the first season did a fine job of setting the stage for. As far as changes, the show moves some things up. In the game, what happens at the dance is hinted at in the beginning, but you don't see it play out like it did in this episode until much later in the story. That doesn't really change anything. One thing that might is that Abby's group shows up like they did at the end here, but the part at the beginning where they're talking about making Joel pay for what he did is a show-only thing. In the game, there was more mystery around their arrival, so we'll have to see why they decided to make that change. Joel's therapy session is also an addition, one that I enjoyed. Since you start out playing the game through Ellie's point of view, it probably would have been pretty clunky to switch over to Joel for a cutscene of him sitting in his therapist's living room. And speaking of that, I said I'd come back to touch on playing the game. And as someone who's not a full-blown gamer, I would say the ideal way to do it is to play the game first. I thought the first one was very good, but knowing how the story would play out made some of it feel like a chore. Whereas I think doing it the other way around might have improved the experience of watching the show. It certainly did with this episode. My biggest nitpick about the first season was that it felt like it was missing some of the things I watch TV for because it stuck so closely to the structure of a video game. It felt chapterized, if that makes sense. Which is kind of funny after playing the games because they're probably the most prestige TV coded games I've ever played, with a bunch of nuanced characters stuck in complicated situations. So if you've made it this far and are still waiting to pull the trigger, I'd say jump straight into part 2 now and try to stay ahead of the show. Also, I think what seems like the worst option would be to watch someone else play it or talk about it. The structure of the second game is something you should experience by going through it, and that's all I can really say without giving spoilers. I've only talked to people I know who played it after I finished, and some of them loved it while some of them hated it, and none of them have had the exact same take as I did, which is kind of by design. To get back to the episode 9 conversation that I talked about in the beginning, that's where Ellie's resentment begins. That's what's going on here, right? As far as we know, that was also the last time they were able to be really honest with each other. Where they are now, 5 years later, it takes you back to her saying time heals all wounds after he comes clean about his scar and what he tried to do after Sarah died, and him cutting her off to correct her to say it wasn't time that did it. That just sort of hangs over everything that's happening now and makes you root for them to put it back together. And I don't know about you, but I'm looking forward to seeing where things will go from here, and I think that's a great place to leave things. One quick thing, as far as I know, HBO isn't sending out advanced screeners to us past this episode, so next week's video will be pushed back a bit. Please like this video if you enjoyed it. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and thanks for watching. I'll talk to you soon.